The room was loud with confidence. Cameras flashing. People talking over one another, until a single laugh cut through it all. Arnold Schwarzenegger leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. A confident grin spread across his face. The kind of grin that belonged to a man who had conquered bodybuilding stages, Hollywood, and politics. He had spent decades being the strongest man in almost every room he walked into. And today, he thought, was no different. Across the training floor stood Chuck Norris. No flashy entrance, no crowd around him, no flexing for cameras. Just a calm man in a simple training outfit, hands relaxed by his sides, eyes steady. He looked less like a superstar and more like someone who didn't need to prove anything. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's Chuck Norris." Arnold glanced over, raised an eyebrow, and chuckled. "That's him," Arnold said loudly, not even trying to hide the amusement in his voice. "I thought he'd be bigger." A few people laughed nervously, others shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew who Chuck Norris was, but they also knew Arnold wasn't the type to back down from anyone. 2 legends, 1 room, and an ego already pressing down on the air. Chuck heard every word, but he didn't react. No glare, no insult back, not even a smirk. Arnold stood up, rolling his shoulders like a lion stretching before reminding everyone who ruled the jungle. "Movies, myths, internet jokes," he added, shaking his head. "People really believe all that?" The laughter grew louder this time. Chuck finally spoke, but his voice was calm, almost quiet. "Belief doesn't matter," he said. "Only results do." That made Arnold laugh even harder. "Oh yeah," Arnold replied. "And what results are those?" Chuck looked at him, not with anger, not with pride, but with something far more dangerous. Certainty. The room slowly began to quiet down. Some people sensed it, that feeling when confidence meets something it doesn't understand yet. When noise starts losing to silence, Chuck took a single step forward, no challenge, no threat. Just one step, and for the first time since the laughter started, Arnold stopped smiling. Because something in Chuck's eyes said this wasn't about fame, it wasn't about muscles, and it definitely wasn't about jokes. This was about skill, and no one in that room knew it yet. But in just moments, one kick was going to change how they looked at strength forever. The laughter slowly faded, but the tension stayed behind, thick and heavy in the air. People looked from Arnold Schwarzenegger to Chuck Norris, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a movie set. There were no scripted lines, no stunt doubles, no second takes, just 2 legends standing in the same room, each carrying a very different kind of power. The training hall was packed. Athletes stretched near the walls, cameras hovered in every corner, and producers whispered excitedly, sensing something unexpected was unfolding. Arnold stood tall at the center of attention, shoulders wide, chest out, owning the space like he always did. Years of applause and admiration had trained him to expect respect the moment he entered a room. Chuck, on the other hand, stood off to the side. He hadn't come to perform. He hadn't come to compete for attention. He had come because he was invited. Nothing more, nothing less. Arnold took a step closer, still smiling, but now there was an edge beneath it. "So tell me," he said, gesturing toward Chuck. "All these stories about you, are they real, or just good marketing?" A few people laughed again, though this time it sounded forced. Some of the younger fighters exchanged glances. They had trained long enough to recognize something different in Chuck's posture, his balance, his breathing, the way he stood completely relaxed, yet perfectly ready. Chuck didn't rise to the bait. He calmly adjusted the sleeve of his training jacket and replied, "Stories grow when people need them. Skills stay the same." Arnold raised his eyebrows. "That's a nice line," he said. "But muscles, discipline, and strength, that's what really matters." Chuck nodded slowly. "True," he said. "But strength isn't always visible." That answer unsettled a few people nearby. Arnold noticed it. He noticed how the room wasn't laughing as freely anymore. So he did what confident men often do when they feel control slipping. He pushed harder. "You know," Arnold said, circling slightly, "I've trained with the best in the world, champions, fighters, soldiers. And they don't stand quietly in corners. Chuck finally looked directly at him. The loudest people, he said, are usually trying to convince themselves. Silence dropped like a weight. Arnold stopped walking. For a moment, the crowd forgot to breathe. This wasn't an argument anymore. It was a measuring of something deeper. Experience versus ego, noise versus calm. Some of the older trainers in the room shifted their stance, suddenly alert. They had seen this before. Not between celebrities, but between men who truly knew what they could do. Arnold laughed again, but it wasn't as confident this time. "All right," he said, clapping his hands once. "Let's see it then." Chuck remained still. "There's nothing to see yet." That was when Arnold smirked. "Afraid of embarrassing yourself?" Chuck took a slow breath. His eyes never left Arnold's. "No," he said quietly. "I just don't strike unless there's a reason." The room felt smaller now, closer, like it was pulling inward around them. No one realized it yet, but this moment right here was the calm before the storm. Because when Chuck finally moved, there would be no laughter left at all. Do you think real strength comes from muscles or mastery? Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The silence didn't break. It stretched. Arnold Schwarzenegger stood facing Chuck Norris, arms slightly apart, chest lifted, chin raised. He had that look people recognized instantly, the look of a man who had never been told no, and had rarely been challenged without winning. Around them, the room seemed to lean in, as if even the walls wanted to see what would happen next. "You don't strike unless there's a reason," Arnold repeated, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "That sounds like an excuse." A few nervous chuckles echoed, but they died quickly. The mood had shifted. This wasn't playful anymore. Chuck remained calm, his posture unchanged. He didn't look away. He didn't stiffen. If anything, he looked more relaxed, like a lake moments before a storm touches its surface. Arnold stepped closer, invading his space. "People hype you up," he continued. "Internet jokes, old stories. But this," he gestured around. "This is reality. Strength is proven, not whispered about." Chuck's eyes didn't blink. "You're right," he said. "It is proven." That was all. The simplicity of the answer irritated Arnold more than an insult ever could. He wanted resistance. He wanted excuses. What he got instead was quiet certainty, and it made him uncomfortable. "You know," Arnold said, turning slightly to the crowd, "I've trained fighters twice your size. Men who hit harder, move faster, and don't hide behind silence." Some people nodded automatically. Others stayed still, watching Chuck closely now. A few seasoned martial artists near the back exchanged looks. They saw it. The grounded feet, the balanced stance, the subtle readiness. Chuck wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Chuck finally shifted his weight just slightly. It was barely noticeable, but the room felt it. "I don't hide," Chuck said. "I can serve." Arnold scoffed. "For what?" A dramatic moment. Chuck answered without hesitation, "For the right one." That did it. Arnold laughed again, sharper this time. "All right, enough philosophy," he said. "If you're so confident, why not show us something? Or is the legend better left untouched?" The crowd stirred. Phones came up. Whispers rippled across the room. Everyone sensed it. This was crossing a line, not because of disrespect alone, but because something real was about to happen. Chuck took a slow breath. Then, he did something unexpected. He smiled, not arrogantly, not mockingly, just a small, calm smile. Like someone who had seen this moment many times before and knew exactly how it ended. "You're mistaking calm for weakness," Chuck said. "That's a common error." Arnold leaned in. "And you're mistaking reputation for ability." For the first time, Chuck's voice hardened. Not louder, just firmer. "Reputation fades," he said. "Ability remains." The room went completely silent. No laughter, no whispers, no movement. Arnold straightened up, eyes narrowing. For a split second, doubt flickered across his face, but pride smothered it immediately. "Then stop talking," he said, "and do something." Chuck looked around briefly, not for approval, not for fear, but as if acknowledging the space, the people, the moment. Then his gaze returned to Arnold. "Once I move," Chuck said quietly, "this stops being entertainment." Arnold waved a hand dismissively. "Relax, I can handle it." That sentence would echo in his mind later. Chuck reached up and slowly removed his training jacket, folding it neatly and placing it aside. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. Every eye followed him. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Someone whispered, "Oh no." Chuck rolled his shoulders once. Just once. His stance shifted. Subtle, precise, balanced. The air in the room changed. What had been tension now felt like pressure. Arnold noticed. His smile faded. For the first time since this began, he adjusted his footing. Just a fraction. Enough to show instinct had kicked in. Chuck raised his eyes. "Last chance," he said. "We can stop." Arnold shook his head. "Show me." And in that instant everyone realized something terrifyingly clear. This wasn't about laughing anymore. This wasn't about ego. This was about to become a lesson, because Chuck Norris had stopped talking. And when he stopped talking, he started moving. No one spoke. The room, once filled with laughter and commentary, now felt sealed shut, as if sound itself had been locked outside. Every eye was fixed on the space between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Chuck Norris, a space that seemed to shrink with every passing second. Chuck stood perfectly still. Not stiff, not tense, still in the way predators are still before they move. Arnold swallowed, almost imperceptibly. He hadn't expected this feeling. He had stepped into countless confrontations, on screen and off, always confident in his size, his strength, his reputation. But something about Chuck's calm unsettled him. It wasn't confidence, it was certainty. Chuck shifted his foot half an inch. That was all it took. The trainers near the wall straightened instantly. A few experienced fighters leaned forward, their expressions changing from curiosity to concern. They recognized the stance now. This wasn't for show. This was real. Arnold noticed the reaction from the crowd and forced a grin. "What?" he said, trying to lighten the moment. "You all look like you've seen a ghost." Chuck didn't respond. He inhaled slowly through his nose, then exhaled, his shoulders dropping just slightly. His body loosened, but in that loosening, something coiled tighter beneath the surface, like a spring wound to its limit. The air felt heavy, dense. A cameraman lowered his camera, forgetting he was supposed to be filming. Somewhere in the back, a phone slipped from someone's hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. No one turned to look. Arnold lifted his hands, more instinct than intention. "You know," he said, "I've taken hits before." Chuck finally spoke. "Then you'll understand." That was it. No countdown, no warning, no dramatic shout, just movement. Chuck's body flowed, not lunged. His foot pivoted, his hips turned, and in one smooth, almost invisible motion, his leg came up. It wasn't wild. It wasn't aggressive. It was controlled, surgical. For a split second, Arnold saw it coming. Too late. The kick didn't crash. It landed precise, clean, perfect. The impact echoed, not with noise but with shock. Arnold's breath left his body in a sharp, involuntary gasp. His eyes widened, not from pain alone, but from disbelief. He staggered back one step, then another. The crowd froze. Arnold caught himself before falling, feet scrambling to regain balance. His hands dropped instinctively to his side, his chest rising rapidly as he struggled to pull air back into his lungs. The room erupted, but not with cheers, with silence. Chuck's leg returned to the ground as calmly as it had lifted. He didn't follow up, he didn't pose, he didn't even look impressed. He simply stood there, balanced and ready, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Arnold stared at him, not angry, not embarrassed, stunned. He had expected force, violence, raw power. What he felt instead was precision, like being struck by something that knew exactly where to land. "You okay?" Chuck asked, his tone neutral. Arnold nodded slowly, still catching his breath. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For the first time since the encounter began, he had no words. The trainers exchanged glances, One of them muttered under his breath. That was a control kick, not a full strike. That realization rippled through the room. If that wasn't full power, what would full power have done? Arnold straightened up, rubbing his chest. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and genuine respect, or at least the beginning of it. That, Arnold said finally, exhaling, was fast. Chuck inclined his head slightly. Speed comes from relaxation. The crowd slowly began to breathe again. Phones lowered, cameras resumed recording, but the energy had changed completely. What had started as entertainment had turned into education. Chuck took a step back, creating distance. "We're done," he said. Arnold didn't argue. He just watched Chuck with a new expression, one that acknowledged a truth he hadn't expected to face today. The truth that strength isn't always loud, that power doesn't need permission, and that sometimes one kick is enough. The silence that followed the kick felt heavier than the impact itself. Arnold Schwarzenegger stood still, chest rising and falling as he drew in slow, careful breaths. The room waited. No one dared to laugh now. No one even whispered. It was as if everyone feared that speaking might break whatever invisible rule had just been written into the air. Chuck Norris lowered his hands completely. His posture relaxed once more. He hadn't advanced. He hadn't threatened. He had proven his point, and stopped exactly there. Arnold finally exhaled and shook his head, a short, quiet sound escaping him. Not anger, not embarrassment, a realization. "I didn't even see it," Arnold said, more to himself than anyone else. Chuck met his eyes. That's usually how it works. A few of the trainers shifted closer, curiosity overpowering caution. One of them glanced at Arnold, then back at Chuck, clearly reassessing everything he thought he knew about power and presence. Arnold straightened his jacket, still rubbing his chest lightly. The confident showman who had laughed minutes earlier was gone. In his place stood a man who had just been reminded of something fundamental. "You could have hit harder," Arnold said. Chuck nodded once. "Yes." That answer sent a ripple through the room. Arnold laughed again. But this time, it was different. Softer, honest. "Then thank you for not doing that." Chuck offered a small smile. Control matters. The crowd slowly began to react, not with applause, but with murmurs of respect. Some people nodded. Others replayed the moment in their minds, still trying to understand how something so fast, so simple, had shifted the balance of the entire room. One of the younger fighters spoke up, unable to hold back. "That kick, was that really it? You didn't follow through." Chuck turned toward him. "A real strike isn't about how much you do," he said. "It's about knowing when to stop." Arnold looked at the young fighter, then back at Chuck. "He's right," Arnold said. "I've spent my life building strength, you can see, but that—" He gestured subtly toward Chuck. "That's something else." There was no sarcasm in his voice now, only respect. Chuck picked up his jacket and slipped it on calmly. "Muscles are tools," he said. "They're useful, but tools need guidance." Arnold nodded slowly. "Discipline." "Experience," Chuck corrected gently. The difference mattered. A producer finally stepped forward, clearing his throat awkwardly. "So, are we continuing the demonstration?" Chuck shook his head. "There's nothing left to demonstrate." Arnold surprised everyone by raising a hand. "He's right," he said firmly. "I've seen enough." That statement carried weight. The same man who had laughed openly at Chuck earlier was now shutting the moment down, not out of pride, but out of understanding. Arnold extended his hand. The room held its breath again. Chuck looked at the hand for a brief moment, then took it. The handshake was firm, equal, unforced. "Respect," Arnold said. Chuck nodded. "Always." Chimeras flashed now, but this time they weren't capturing mockery or tension. They were capturing a turning point. As Chuck turned to leave, someone in the crowd called out, "So who would win if it were real?" Chuck paused at the door. He didn't turn around. "The one who doesn't need to," he said. And with that, he walked out. Arnold remained standing there for a long moment, eyes following Chuck's path. Then he turned back to the room. "Remember this," he said quietly. "Never laugh at someone just because they're calm. No one argued. They couldn't. Did Arnold earn respect in your eyes after this moment? Yes or no? Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The room didn't return to normal after Chuck Norris walked out. It couldn't. Something fundamental had shifted, and everyone felt it. Conversations that had once been loud and playful were now quiet, thoughtful. People spoke in lower voices, choosing their words carefully, as if they had just witnessed a lesson they weren't meant to forget. Arnold Schwarzenegger remained where he was, arms resting at his sides, eyes unfocused for a moment. He wasn't replaying the kick alone. He was replaying everything that came before it. The laughter, the confidence, the assumptions. Son of the senior trainer stepped closer. "You all right?" he asked. Arnold nodded. "Yeah," he said slowly, "more than all right." He looked around the room. Faces that once looked to him for dominance now looked at him for something else. How he would respond. Strength had brought him attention his whole life. Character would decide what followed. "I misjudged him," Arnold said aloud. Not defensively, not reluctantly, openly. The words surprised some people. Arnold Schwarzenegger was not known for public admissions of error, but this wasn't a performance. This was reflection. He didn't need to prove anything. Arnold continued. "I did." That sentence landed harder than the kick. A few heads nodded. Others looked down, realizing how often they confused noise with power, size with skill. Arnold walked toward the center of the floor and addressed everyone. "I've trained my body for decades," he said. "I know what strength feels like. But what I felt today wasn't brute force. It was control. And that's something you earn over time." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Chuck Norris could have embarrassed me. He didn't. That tells you everything you need to know about the kind of man he is." Respect spread quietly like heat. One of the younger athletes raised his hand. "So, what do we take from this?" Arnold smiled slightly. "That if someone stays calm when you mock them, you should probably stop talking." A few light laughs broke out. Not mocking, but relieved. The tension finally began to ease. Outside, Chuck was already halfway down the corridor when Arnold caught up to him. "Chuck," Arnold called. Chuck turned. Arnold stopped a few feet away, keeping a respectful distance. "I want to say this properly," he said. "I was wrong." Chuck studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We all are sometimes." "No," Arnold replied. "Not like that. I let ego speak first." Chuck smiled faintly. "Ego is loud," he said. "Experience whispers." Arnold let out a short breath. "You could have humbled me in front of everyone." "But that wasn't the lesson," Chuck said. Arnold nodded slowly. He understood now. They stood in silence for a moment. Two men who had nothing left to prove to each other. "You know," Arnold said, "people always ask who's stronger." Chuck chuckled quietly. "They ask the wrong question." "What's the right one?" Arnold asked. Chuck met his eyes. "Who needs strength the least?" That answer stayed with Arnold. They shook hands once more. This time without cameras, without an audience. Back inside, the trainers resumed their sessions, but something had changed. Corrections were gentler. Instructions were clearer. Respect flowed more freely. Arnold returned to the floor. Not as the loudest presence, but as a leader shaped by humility. Later that day, when someone joked about the moment, Arnold stopped them with a raised hand. "Don't," he said. "That wasn't a joke. That was education." And no one argued, because everyone there had learned the same thing. Real power doesn't announce itself. Real masters don't boast. And the strongest people in the room are often the ones who don't need to remind you. By the time the lights dimmed and the crowd began to leave, the training hall felt like a different place. What had started as entertainment, maybe even ego, had ended as something far more meaningful. People weren't talking about the kick anymore. They were talking about what it meant. Arnold Schwarzenegger sat quietly on a bench, towel draped over his shoulders, staring at the floor. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about winning, proving, or dominating. He was thinking about listening. Across the room, young fighters packed their bags, their conversations unusually thoughtful. "Did you see how calm he was?" one whispered. "He didn't even look angry," another replied. "That's real confidence." Someone else added. Arnold overheard it all. He smiled to himself. Not because they were praising Chuck Norris, but because they were finally understanding the difference between image and essence. He stood up and addressed them one last time. "You'll see a lot of loud people in your lives," he said. "People who flex, shout, and demand attention. Don't confuse that with strength." The room went quiet again, not with tension, but with respect. "Real power," Arnold continued, "doesn't need an audience." That line stayed with everyone. Outside, Chuck Norris paused before getting into his car. A young fighter ran up, nervous but determined. "Mr. Norris," he said. "Can I ask you something?" Chuck nodded. "Of course. How did you stay so calm, even when he laughed at you?" Chuck considered the question for a moment. "Because anger gives control to the other person," he said. "Calm keeps it with you." The fighter nodded, eyes wide, as if he had just been handed a secret no one else could see. As Chuck drove away, the story had already begun to spread. Not as gossip, not as a rumor, but as a lesson. People would retell it differently. Some would exaggerate. Others would dramatize the kick, but those who were there would always remember the truth. The kick wasn't the point. The restraint was. Arnold later spoke about the moment in private conversations. Not to glorify himself, and not to challenge Chuck, but to remind others. "I laughed," he admitted, "and I learned." That honesty became part of the story, too. Because in the end, this wasn't about Arnold versus Chuck. It was about ego versus discipline, noise versus silence, assumption versus reality, and silence won, every time. The lesson was simple, but powerful. Never underestimate someone who doesn't feel the need to impress you. Never mistake humility for weakness. And never laugh at a calm man. Because calm usually means control. The strongest people don't announce themselves. They don't argue. They don't need validation. They let their actions speak. Once if necessary, and then they walk away. Type respect if you believe humility is the real definition of strength. And tell us, where are you watching from? We want to hear from you.